The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council had never seen anything like this. Representatives from 847 different species filled the vast chamber. But instead of the usual orderly debate and careful diplomacy, chaos ruled the floor. Some delegations demanded immediate quarantine of the Sol system. Others insisted that human assistance was the greatest gift the galaxy had ever received. Many simply sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had learned about the nature of human contact. At the center of the storm stood Cho Yun-hai, Earth's senior ambassador to the Council. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes, but she spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who genuinely believed in the rightness of her cause. "Honored representatives," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. "I understand that recent revelations about human history have caused concern among some council members. I am here to address those concerns and to assure you that humanity's intentions remain exactly what they have always been: to help, to learn, and to build a better future together." The response was immediate and chaotic. Dozens of representatives tried to speak at once, their voices creating a cacophony of different languages and translation overlays. "The humans do not understand," shouted the representative from the hive clusters. "They are destroying us while claiming to help us." "We have seen the evidence," called out a Centaurian delegate. "Species that accept human assistance cease to exist within a few generations." "But the improvements work," countered an Andromedan speaker. "Our people are healthier and happier than they have ever been." Yun-hai waited patiently for the noise to die down. She had expected this reaction. The archival research that had been leaked to the General Council membership painted a terrifying picture of human contact, cycles of improvement, optimization, and eventual extinction of entire civilizations. But Yun-hai had read the same reports, and she could not see the problem that had so frightened her alien colleagues. "I have reviewed all the historical evidence that has been presented to this assembly," she said when the chamber finally quieted. "Yes, human contact has led to dramatic changes in galactic civilizations throughout history. Yes, these changes have been comprehensive and long-lasting. But I ask you, what exactly is wrong with that?" She activated a holographic display that filled the space above the assembly floor. It showed health statistics, economic data, and quality-of-life measurements from the dozens of species that had implemented human suggestions over the past year. Infant mortality down by 67% in the Centaurian Republic. Economic productivity up by 31% in the Andromedan Trade Federation. Violent crime reduced by 89% in the Outer Rim Confederacy. "These are not the statistics of destruction. These are the statistics of progress. But at what cost?" demanded a voice from the Outer Rim delegation. "We are losing ourselves." "You are losing your problems," Yun-hai replied calmly. "You are losing your inefficiencies. You are losing your suffering. If that means losing aspects of yourselves that caused pain and hardship, then yes, those aspects deserve to be lost." The chamber erupted again. Half the delegates seemed to agree with Yun-hai's logic. The other half appeared to be horrified by it. In a secure briefing room beneath the assembly hall, Hong Sang-woo was presenting his final analysis to the Council's Emergency Planning Committee. As the chief strategist for galactic security, his job was to assess threats and develop responses to them. But the human situation defied every category in his threat assessment protocols. "The problem," Sang-woo explained to the dozen beings gathered around the briefing table, "is that humans do not see themselves as conquerors. They genuinely believe they are helping other species become better versions of themselves. But they are wrong," said the representative from the hive clusters. "They are not making us better. They are making us human." "From a human perspective, those are the same thing," Sang-woo replied. "Humans cannot conceive of a form of improvement that does not move other species closer to human standards of behavior and organization." He activated a display showing the psychological profiles that had been developed for human leadership. "Every human we have studied shows the same pattern. Extreme empathy combined with powerful optimization drives. They see suffering and feel compelled to fix it. They see inefficiency and cannot leave it alone. They see conflict and must resolve it." "That sounds admirable," said one of the committee members. "It would be if their solutions were not invariably human solutions. When humans help other species, they help them become more like humans. They cannot help them become better versions of their original selves because humans cannot imagine any form of improvement. that does not involve adopting human characteristics. The committee members studied the data in uncomfortable silence. The evidence was overwhelming. Human contact led to human-style optimization, and human-style optimization led to the gradual extinction of non-human ways of thinking and being. "What options do we have?" asked the elderly committee chair. Sang-Woo had dreaded this question. "Limited. We could attempt to quarantine the Sol system and prevent further human contact with the galaxy." Would that work? Probably not. Humans would interpret the quarantine as a problem to be solved. They would work to understand our concerns and develop solutions to address them. Even our attempts to avoid them would become opportunities for them to help us. What about military action? Sang-Woo shook his head. Impossible. Half the Council's member species have already implemented human improvements. They would never agree to military action against the beings who have made their lives better. And the humans themselves have done nothing that could justify the use of force. So we have no options? We have one, Sang-Woo said quietly. We could choose to embrace the transformation, accept that the galaxy is going to become human, and try to guide the process to preserve as much diversity as possible within human parameters. The committee members looked at each other with expressions of defeat and resignation. They had spent their careers defending galactic civilization from various threats, but this threat came disguised as salvation. How do you fight an enemy that only wants to make you happy? Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the transformation continued to accelerate. Yang Hyo-jin monitored communications networks from her station on the Council's central hub. Her job was to track information flow between different species and identify potential sources of instability or conflict, but the patterns she was seeing defied all her previous experience. Usually, galactic communications showed enormous diversity. Different species had different priorities, different concerns, different ways of processing and sharing information. The communications networks looked like a chaotic web of competing interests and incompatible worldviews. But that was changing. Over the past year, the networks had become more organized. Information flowed more efficiently. Conflicts were resolved more quickly. Different species were beginning to communicate in more compatible ways. They are starting to think alike, Hyo-jin reported to her supervisor. Not identical, but compatible, like instruments in an orchestra learning to play the same symphony. The change was most obvious in the younger generation. Children and young adults who had grown up during the human contact period were remarkably similar in their approaches to problem solving, their social values, and their long-term goals. They looked like members of dozens of different species, but they thought with what was essentially the same mind. More disturbing, they seemed to be teaching these approaches to their elders. Parents, teachers, and community leaders were adopting the perspectives and methods of the younger generation, claiming that the new ways were clearly superior to traditional approaches. "We are witnessing the birth of a galactic consensus," Hyo-jin wrote in her report. "For the first time in galactic history, all species are beginning to agree on fundamental questions of value and organization." But she could not shake the feeling that this consensus was really a form of surrender. The galaxy was not learning to think together. It was learning to think like humans. On Earth, changes were happening that the humans themselves barely noticed. Children like Lim Jae-hyun were no longer unusual. An entire generation had grown up with an intuitive understanding of galactic technology, alien psychology, and interspecies relations. Kang Min-jun, a teenager who had been born just before first contact, spent his free time designing faster-than-light communication systems that made the existing galactic networks look primitive. Park Soo-jun, a young medical researcher, had developed treatments for genetic diseases that affected dozens of species she had never studied. Lee Hee-jung, barely out of university, had written a framework for interspecies harmony that was being implemented on hundreds of worlds. None of them understood why their alien friends seemed increasingly nervous around them. Their suggestions were helpful. Their improvements worked. Their solutions solved real problems that had caused real suffering. Why were so many species retreating from contact with Earth? The answer came from an unexpected source. Sim Bo-ram, a 10-year-old girl from Seoul, was watching the news with her mother Go Young-soo when a story came on about alien ships leaving the Sol system. Lim Jae-hyun was 7 years old and had never lived in a world without aliens. He had been born 3 months after first contact, and his earliest memories included pictures of the strange, tall beings who visited Earth from the stars. To him, they were as normal as birds or trees or the sun in the sky. His teacher, Han Mi-young, had been explaining how the alien ships worked. She described the complicated energy systems that let them travel between stars, the complex navigation computers that guided them through space, and the advanced materials that protected them from radiation and meteor impacts. Jae-hyun listened politely, but something about the explanation bothered him. When Mi-young finished, he raised his small hand. "Teacher," he said, "why do the alien ships use such difficult engines? Would it not be easier if they just used quantum field manipulation with a simple particle acceleration system?" Mi-young stared at the child. "What did you say?" "The engines," Jae-hyun repeated patiently. "They are too complicated. If they used quantum field manipulation, they could go much faster and use less energy. I can see how to fix them." Mi-young felt a cold chill run down her spine. Jae-hyun was a bright child, but he had never studied advanced physics. He should not have been able to understand alien technology, much less suggest improvements to it. "Where did you learn about quantum field manipulation?" she asked carefully. Jae-hyun looked confused by the question. "I do not know. I just can see it. Like when you showed us the pictures of the engines, I could see where they were wasting energy and making things too hard." That afternoon, Mi-young called Jae-hyun's parents. She was not sure how to explain what had happened, so she simply asked them to come to school for a meeting. "Is Jae-hyun in trouble?" asked his mother. "No," Mi-young said slowly. "But I think we need to talk." Similar conversations were happening all over Earth. Children born after first contact were demonstrating knowledge and abilities that they should not have possessed. They could see flaws in alien technology, suggest improvements to alien social systems, and solve problems that had puzzled galactic civilizations for centuries. More disturbing, they seemed to think this was normal. Baek Seung-ho had spent most of his career managing minor crises for the Council. Trade disputes between neighboring species, territorial disagreements about asteroid mining rights, diplomatic incidents caused by cultural misunderstandings. He was good at his job because he understood that most problems had simple solutions, if you could get all parties to think rationally about their interests. The human situation was different. This was not a crisis that could be solved through negotiation or compromise. This was something that challenged the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. The reports kept coming in, and each one was worse than the last. The Centaurian Republic had implemented 17 human suggestions in the past month. Their government efficiency had improved dramatically. Their economic output had increased by 31%, and their crime rates had dropped to historic lows. The Centaurian people were happier and more prosperous than they had ever been. They were also forgetting their traditional songs and replacing them with human-influenced music that they claimed was more emotionally sophisticated. The Andromedan Trade Federation had revolutionized their entire commercial system based on casual advice from human economists. Trade flows that had remained stable for thousands of years had been reorganized for optimal efficiency. Ancient trading partnerships had been dissolved and replaced with new arrangements that generated higher profits for all parties involved. The Andromedans were thrilled with the improvements. They could not understand why some council members seemed concerned about the rapid changes in their civilization. The Outer Rim Confederacy had begun implementing human approaches to conflict resolution and social organization. Wars that had lasted for centuries were being settled through human-style mediation techniques. Social problems that had plagued entire species for generations were being solved through human-inspired reforms. Each implementation was voluntary. Each change improved lives. Each transformation brought obvious benefits to the species involved. But Seung-ho could see the pattern. Within a few generations, none of these species would bear any resemblance to what they had been before human contact. They would look the same and speak the same languages, but they would think like humans, act like humans, and solve problems like humans. The galaxy was becoming human, one improvement at a time. Moon Tae-yang had always considered himself a helpful person. As the director of Earth's scientific exchange program, his job was to share human knowledge with alien civilizations and learn from their discoveries in return. It was work that he found deeply satisfying, and he was proud of the difference he was making in the galaxy. In the past month alone, his team had helped solve a plague on the Outer Rim that had killed millions of beings. They had designed a new water purification system that brought clean drinking water to 37 underdeveloped worlds. They had shared medical techniques that eliminated genetic diseases in 4 different species. The work was going better than anyone had expected. Alien species were eagerly adopting human solutions to their problems, and the results were consistently positive. Tae Yang's reports back to Earth were full of success stories and grateful messages from civilizations that had benefited from human assistance. So, why did his alien colleagues seem increasingly uncomfortable around him? The change had been gradual but unmistakable. Scientists who had initially been excited to work with humans now seemed nervous and distracted during meetings. Diplomatic liaisons who had once been warm and friendly had become formal and distant. Several species had quietly withdrawn from exchange programs without explanation. Most puzzling of all, Tai Yang kept receiving requests for information about human intentions and long-term goals. The questions were polite but persistent, and they seemed to be based on assumptions that he could not understand. "Do humans plan to expand their influence throughout the galaxy?" asked a Centaurian researcher during what was supposed to be a routine coordination meeting. "I do not understand the question," Tae Yang replied. "We are sharing knowledge and helping solve problems. That is what civilized species do for each other. But what is the ultimate purpose of this assistance?" Tae Yang frowned. "To make things better. To reduce suffering and improve lives. Why would we need any other purpose?" The Centaurian made notes and changed the subject, but Tae Yang could see worry in the alien's expression. It was the same worried look he had been seeing more and more often in recent weeks. That evening, Tai Yang called his colleague Kwan In-ho, who worked as a cultural liaison between humans and various alien species. In-ho had been documenting the social and cultural changes that resulted from human-alien interactions, and his reports might explain the increasingly strange behavior of their alien partners. "They are afraid of us," In-ho said bluntly, when Tae Yang asked about the situation. "Not afraid that we will hurt them, but afraid of what we are doing to them." "What are we doing to them?" Tae Yang asked. In-ho sent him a data file. "Read this. It documents the changes that have occurred in species that have had extended contact with humans." Tae Yang spent the night reading In-ho's research. The changes were extensive and consistent across all the species studied. Improvements in health, technology, social organization, and quality of life. Reductions in conflict, inefficiency, and suffering. By any reasonable measure, human contact had been enormously beneficial for every species involved. But there was something else in the data. Something that made Tai Yang uncomfortable, even though he could not identify exactly what it was. The species that had been helped by humans were becoming more similar to each other. Their approaches to problem-solving were converging. Their social structures were developing along parallel lines. Their cultural expressions were beginning to share common themes and styles. They were becoming more like humans. "I still do not see the problem," Tai Yang told In-ho the next morning. "If human approaches to these issues work better than the alternatives, why should other species not adopt them?" "Because they are losing their identity," In-ho replied. "Their unique perspectives and approaches are being replaced with human perspectives and approaches. But if the human approaches are better according to whom? By what standards?" Tae Yang thought about it. "By the results. Human approaches reduce suffering, improve efficiency, and increase prosperity. These are objective measures of improvement, are they?" In-ho asked. "Or are they human measures of improvement? Maybe other species value things that humans do not understand. Maybe some forms of inefficiency serve important purposes in alien cultures. Maybe what humans see as problems are actually features that those species want to preserve." "That does not make sense," Tae Yang said. "Why would any species want to preserve suffering or inefficiency?" In-ho stared at him for a long moment. "You just proved my point. You cannot imagine why any rational being would choose to remain in an unoptimized state, but maybe optimization itself is a human value that other species do not share." Across the galaxy, the process was accelerating. Human solutions were spreading through the Council's member species like ripples on a pond. Ryu Haiwan had always loved puzzles. As a child on the water world of Aquatica Prime, she had spent hours arranging shells and coral fragments into complex patterns. As an adult, she brought that same love of patterns to her work in the Council's xenobiology department, where she studied how different species adapted to each other during first contact situations. The human contact should have been routine. Most species showed predictable patterns during integration: initial caution, gradual acceptance, eventual cooperation. But the patterns around human contact were different. They were too perfect. HFY spread her data across multiple screens in her laboratory. Each screen showed the biological and social changes occurring in species that had spent time around humans. The changes were small and beneficial: improved immune systems, better problem-solving abilities, reduced aggression and increased cooperation, enhanced learning capacity. Any one of these changes would be considered a positive development. Together they formed something that made HFY deeply uncomfortable. "They are becoming more human," she said to her empty laboratory. Not genetically, but functionally. She pulled up comparative brain scans from 3 different species that had participated in extended cultural exchanges with Earth: Centaurians who had spent months learning human languages, Andromedans who had worked closely with human artists, Outer Rim traders who had adopted human business practices. The scans showed subtle but consistent changes in brain structure. The areas responsible for empathy had grown larger. Neural pathways associated with creative problem-solving had become more complex. Most significantly, the regions that process social cooperation had been enhanced. "They are thinking more like humans," HFY whispered. She called up historical data from the archives, looking for similar patterns in past first contact situations. What she found made her hands shake as she typed. Every species that had ever made contact with humans during previous cycles showed identical changes. The biological improvements were exactly the same. The neurological adaptations followed the same patterns. Even the social transformations occurred in the same sequence. Humans were not just helpful neighbors. They were a cosmic constant, a force of nature that appeared every 50,000 years to reshape the galaxy according to their own template. Song Ji-hai worked in a different part of the council complex, but she was reaching similar conclusions. As a military advisor, she specialized in threat assessment and strategic planning. Her job was to identify potential dangers to council security and develop responses to them. The human situation had started as a routine evaluation. First contact with a pre-spaceflight species required standard security protocols: assessment of their military capabilities, analysis of their territorial ambitions, evaluation of their potential as allies or enemies. But humans defied every category in the threat assessment manual. They had no significant military capabilities by galactic standards. Their weapons were primitive, their ships were slow, and their military organizations were small and focused on planetary defense. By any conventional measure, they posed no threat to the Council. Yet Ji-hai's analysis showed something troubling. Every species that interacted with humans began showing signs of what she could only describe as optimization drift. The Centaurian trade delegation had restructured their entire economic model after a casual conversation with a human economist. The changes had improved their efficiency by 23% and eliminated corruption in their trading networks. When asked why they had made such dramatic changes based on suggestions from a pre-spaceflight species, they seemed confused by the question. The human suggestions made sense, they had reported. Why would we not implement improvements to our system? The Andromedan Cultural Exchange Group had returned home and immediately began promoting human artistic styles and philosophical concepts. Within months, human-influenced art and literature had spread across dozens of Andromedan worlds. Traditional Andromedan cultural forms were being abandoned or modified to incorporate human elements. When asked about this dramatic shift, the Andromedans had similar responses. The human approaches were better, more emotionally satisfying, more intellectually sophisticated. Why would they cling to inferior traditional forms when they had discovered superior alternatives? Ji-hai documented case after case of the same pattern. Humans would make friendly suggestions or share their approaches to various problems. Other species would adopt these approaches because they worked better than their own methods. Within a short time, human methods became the standard, and traditional approaches were forgotten or abandoned. It is not conquest, Ji-hai wrote in her report. It is replacement through superiority. Humans do not force other species to change. They simply demonstrate better ways of doing things, and other species voluntarily adopt those better ways. The problem, Ji-hai realized, was that better was a human judgment. What humans considered improvements might not be improvements from the perspective of other species. But by the time those species realized this, they had already changed too much to go back. Park Won-sik, Earth's representative to the Council, was beginning to notice that his alien colleagues were acting strangely. Conversations that had once been warm and enthusiastic had become formal and distant. Several species that had initially expressed strong interest in cultural exchanges had quietly withdrawn from the programs. Most puzzling of all, Won-sik kept receiving questions about human intentions and human nature. The questions were polite but persistent, and they seemed to be based on some underlying concern that Won-sik could not identify. "Do humans ever make mistakes?" asked the Centaurian trade representative during what was supposed to be a routine meeting about commerce agreements. "Of course," Won-sik replied, puzzled by the question. "All species make mistakes. That is how we learn and improve. But do humans ever make mistakes that they do not then try to fix?" Won-sik thought about it. "Well, if we notice a mistake, we usually try to correct it. Why would we not?" The Centaurian representative made some notes and changed the subject, but Won-sik could see worry in the alien's large eyes. Similar conversations occurred throughout the week. Andromedans asking about human attitudes toward tradition and cultural preservation. Outer Rim species wanting to know about human approaches to conflict resolution and social organization. Hive cluster representatives inquiring about human biological enhancement and genetic modification practices. All the questions seemed to assume that humans had hidden agendas or ulterior motives. Won-sik found this frustrating and slightly insulting. Humans had been nothing but open and helpful since first contact. They had shared their knowledge freely, offered assistance with various problems, and asked for nothing in return except friendship and cooperation. "I think they are starting to fear us," Won-sik confided to Kim Yoo-jin, a council psychologist who had been studying human-alien interactions. "But I cannot understand why. We have done nothing threatening." Yoo-jin had been conducting her own research into the psychological effects of human contact, and her findings were deeply disturbing. Every species that spent extended time around humans began showing measurable changes in their thought patterns and behavioral preferences. "It is not fear of what you have done," Yoo-jin explained carefully. "It is fear of what you are." "What do you mean?" Yoo-jin pulled up her research data. "Humans have an unusual psychological profile compared to other species. You show extremely high levels of empathy, combined with powerful drives toward problem-solving and optimization. When you encounter suffering or inefficiency, you experience genuine distress and feel compelled to fix the problem." "That sounds like a good thing," Won-sik said. "For humans, perhaps, but your solutions to problems are invariably human solutions. When you help other species, you help them become more like humans. You do not seem to be able to help them become better versions of themselves." Won-sik frowned. "I do not understand the difference." "That," Yoo-jin said quietly, "is exactly the problem." She showed him brain scans from various species before and after human contact. The changes were subtle but consistent. Increased activity in regions associated with human-style emotional processing. Decreased activity in areas that governed species-specific instincts and behaviors. Every species that interacts with humans begins thinking more like humans, Yoo-jin explained. They adopt human values, human approaches to problems, human ways of relating to others. Within a few generations, they become functionally human, even though they still look like their original species. "But if human approaches work better," Won-sik began. "Better for what?" Yoo-jin interrupted. "Better for humans? Or better for the species being changed? And who decides what better means?" Won-sik stared at the data for a long time. He saw the evidence of change, but he could not see anything wrong with it. The species that had been influenced by human contact were healthier, happier, and more successful than they had been before. Their societies were more peaceful, their technologies were more efficient, and their quality of life had improved dramatically. "You are proving my point," Yoo-jin said sadly, watching Won-sik's reactions. "You cannot see the problem because you are human." To you? The inner circle of the Galactic Council had not held an emergency session in over 200 years. The last time had been during the Outer Rim War, when 3 species had tried to break away from the Council and form their own alliance. That crisis had taken months to resolve through diplomacy and careful negotiation. This crisis was different. This crisis had the potential to end the council entirely. 12 beings sat around a circular table in the most secure room on the council's central station. They represented the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy, civilizations that had survived for millions of years and seen the rise and fall of countless others. Their combined experience spanned eons of galactic history. All of them looked terrified. An Su-jin stood at the center of the circle, her hands shaking slightly as she prepared to present her research. Over the past week, she and her team had worked without sleep, digging through every available record about Sol 3 and the species called humans. What they had found defied belief, but the evidence was overwhelming. Honored Council, Su-jin began, what I'm about to share will challenge everything we thought we knew about the galaxy and our place in it. She activated a holographic display that filled the air above the table. Ancient texts, star charts, and fragmentary records swirled around them in a three-dimensional web of connections and cross-references. Sol 3 is not just inhabited by humans, Su-jin continued. It is where humans originated, but not recently. Our oldest records suggest that humans have existed on that world for at least 60,000 years, possibly much longer. One of the council members, an insectoid being from the hive clusters, clicked its mandibles nervously. Impossible. Our surveys showed they only developed spaceflight within the last century. That is correct, Su-jin replied. But our surveys were wrong about what they were looking for. We looked for a species developing technology. We should have been looking for a species remembering technology. The holographic display shifted to show a timeline. Every 50 to 60,000 years, the same pattern repeated. First silence from Sol 3, then gradual contact with nearby systems, then rapid expansion across the galaxy, then sudden disappearance. We believe humans operate on a cosmic cycle, Su-jin explained. They develop technology, spread across the galaxy, and then somehow die out on their homeworld. After thousands of years of isolation, they begin the cycle again. And what happens to the galaxy during their active periods? Asked the representative from the Centaurian Republic. Su-jin paused. This was the part she dreaded most. The galaxy becomes better, she said quietly. Much better. Every record we have found from previous human cycles describes vast improvements in technology, medicine, social organization, and quality of life across hundreds of species. That sounds beneficial, said another council member. It would be, Su-jin replied. If those species still existed, the room fell silent. The holographic display changed again, showing the galactic map as it would have appeared 50,000 years ago. Hundreds of civilizations, many more advanced than current council members, spread across the spiral arms of the galaxy. Where are they now? Su-jin asked rhetorically. The Veltheron Empire, the Akmoran Confederation, the Golden Republic of Sektar, some of the most advanced civilizations in galactic history. All gone. All vanished during the last human cycle. Min-seo, the quantum archaeologist, stepped forward to join the presentation. She was pale and looked like she had not slept in days. We have been analyzing the oldest records we can find, Min-seo said. The pattern is consistent across every human cycle. First contact is always peaceful. Humans are always helpful and friendly. They share technology and knowledge freely. They solve problems that local species cannot solve themselves. And then, prompted the council member from the Outer Rim Confederacy. And then those species improve, Min-seo replied. Their technology becomes more efficient. Their societies become more harmonious. Their biology becomes more optimized. Within a few generations, they become perfect. What is wrong with perfection? Asked the hive representative. They stop being themselves, Su-jin answered. We found one intact record from the Veltheran civilization, written during the last human cycle. It describes the transformation in detail. Quote, our children are taller, stronger, and smarter than we ever were. They live longer and think more clearly. They solve problems that puzzled us for centuries. They love more purely and forgive more easily than the old generations. They are everything we dreamed our people could become. But when I look at them, I no longer recognize them as Veltheran. They have become something else, something better, something that is not us. The holographic display showed genetic charts and biological scans. The records suggest that humans do not conquer through force, Min-seo continued. They conquer through improvement. They see suffering and fix it. They see inefficiency and optimize it. They see conflict and resolve it. Every change they make is beneficial to the species they are helping. Then why do those species disappear? Asked the Centaurian representative. Because they become human, Sujin said simply. Not genetically, but functionally. They adopt human ways of thinking, human values, human solutions to problems. Within a few generations, their original culture exists only in museums. Their original biology exists only in historical records. They have been optimized out of existence. Meanwhile, on Earth, changes were accelerating in ways that the humans themselves barely noticed. Li Dongjin, a biotechnician working with the Council's medical exchange program, had made what he considered a minor discovery. The aliens had been suffering from what they called genetic drift, small errors that accumulated in their DNA over thousands of years. Using human techniques for gene analysis, Dongjin had found ways to correct some of these errors. It is really simple, he explained to his colleague Young Sora. Their cells just need a little adjustment in how they repair themselves. I sent them a treatment protocol that should help. Young Sora nodded absently. She was working on a translation problem for the diplomatic corps. The council used a complex system of formal pronouns that showed respect between different species. But the system was inefficient. It often led to misunderstandings and hurt feelings. Sora had designed a simpler system that preserved respect while eliminating confusion. Neither of them noticed that their alien colleagues had become quieter in recent weeks. They did not see the worried glances or overhear the hushed conversations in languages they could not understand. They certainly did not know that Li Dongjin's simple genetic treatment had already been implemented by 3 species with remarkable results. Children born after the treatment were healthier, smarter, and lived longer. Parents were thrilled with the improvements. The children themselves were different in ways that their parents could not quite identify. Back in the council chambers, the presentation continued. Sujin showed records of the previous human cycles, pieced together from fragments and archaeological evidence. The humans never seem to realize what they are doing, she explained. Every record describes them as genuinely caring and helpful. They appear to be motivated by sincere desire to reduce suffering and improve lives. But their definition of improvement is comprehensive, meaning, asked the Outer Rim representative. Meaning they do not stop with technology or medicine, Mincio replied. They improve social structures, belief systems, art, music, literature, even the way species think about themselves and their place in the universe. They remake entire civilizations in their own image, one small improvement at a time. The holographic display showed a simulation of how the process worked. It started with simple technological exchanges. Then came medical improvements. Then social suggestions. Then cultural influences. Each step was beneficial. Each step made life better for the species being helped. But the cumulative effect was transformation so complete that the original species might as well have never existed. How long does this process take? Asked the hive representative. Based on the records, usually 3 to 5 generations, Sujin answered. The first generation sees the benefits and is grateful. The second generation grows up with the improvements as normal. The third generation cannot imagine life without them. By the 4th generation, they have forgotten what their species was like before the humans arrived. And then the humans disappear? Not exactly, Mincio said. The records suggest that the humans integrate so completely with the species they have improved that they become indistinguishable from them. The galaxy becomes filled with billions of beings who look like different species but think like humans, act like humans, and solve problems like humans. A galaxy of humans wearing different faces, whispered the Centaurian representative. Until something happens on Sol 3, Sujin continued. Every cycle ends the same way. A catastrophe on the human homeworld. Disease, war, natural disaster, something that kills the human population and breaks the cycle. The improved species cut off from human influence gradually revert to more primitive forms. Most die out entirely. A few survive and rebuild, and then the cycle starts again. Namji-woo worked in the deepest part of the Council's Great Archive Station. She was one of only 12 archivists trusted with the restricted files, records so old and sensitive that most Council members did not even know they existed. Her job was usually quiet and peaceful. She organized ancient histories, translated dead languages, and maintained the massive databases that held 50 million years of galactic records. 3 months after first contact with Earth, Jiwoo received a routine assignment. The integration department needed a full background check on Sol 3 for the new member application. This meant searching through every mention of the system in council records, no matter how old or obscure. Jiwoo expected to find nothing. Most pre-contact worlds had no mentions in the archives. Occasionally, there might be an old survey record or a note about interesting radio signals. But Sol 3 was in a quiet part of the galaxy, far from the major trade routes and council territories. She started with the most recent files and worked backward through time. 10 years, nothing. 100 years, nothing. 1,000 years, a brief note about unusual stellar activity in the system, but nothing about planets or life. Then she reached the 10,000-year mark and found something strange. It was just a fragment, part of a damaged file from the old Centaurian archives. Most of the text was corrupted, but she could make out a few words. Sol 3. Warning. Avoid system. Great danger. Jiwoo frowned and dug deeper. At 20,000 years, she found another fragment, this time from the Andromedan Trade Federation. Ships lost near Yellow Star. Crew reports strange dreams. Recommend quarantine. Her hands started to shake as she pushed further back in time. 30,000 years. 40,000. At each milestone, she found more fragments. Warnings. Emergency broadcasts. Desperate final transmissions from ships and colonies that had ventured too close to Sol 3. By the time she reached 50,000 years, Jiwoo had filled 3 data crystals with fragments and references. Her supervisor would have to see this. But first, she needed to call Yoon Sang-hoon. Yoon Sang-hoon was older than most species in the galaxy. As a Centaurian, he had lived for over 800 years, and he had spent most of that time studying history. If anyone would know what these fragments meant, it would be him. Jiwoo? His voice crackled through the communication system. It is late. What is so important that you call me at this hour? I need you to come to the archives, she said. I have found something about Sol 3 that you need to see. Sang-hoon arrived within an hour, his old face creased with worry. Jiwoo had worked with him for decades, and she had never sounded so frightened. She showed him the fragments. As he read, his expression changed from curiosity to concern to something approaching terror. How far back do these go? He asked quietly. At least 50,000 years, Jiwoo replied. Maybe more. The older archives are too damaged to search properly. Sang-hoon was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Show me the linguistic analysis. Jiwoo pulled up her translation work. She had run the fragments through every language database in the archives. Most were in dead languages from extinct civilizations, but the pattern was always the same. Warning, danger, avoid, stay away. But there was something else. In the oldest fragments, there was a name. Not Sol 3, not Terra, something else entirely. Hadal Noctu, Sang-hoon read slowly. In the old tongue, that means dark home, Jiwoo finished. Or maybe death home. The translation is not clear. They looked at each other across the archive table. Around them, millions of data crystals hummed quietly in their storage racks, holding the memories of countless civilizations. But none of those civilizations had ever called a planet by such a terrifying name. There is more, Jiwoo said. She activated another display, showing a pattern she had discovered. Every 50 to 60,000 years, the warnings stop. Complete silence about Sol 3 for several thousand years. Then they start again. New warnings from new civilizations. As if something sleeps and wakes, Sang-hoon murmured. Cycles. Or as if something dies and is reborn. Meanwhile, on Earth, changes were happening that the humans barely noticed. Shin Unsu, a military strategist working with the Council's security liaison, had been tracking the alien ships in Earth's solar system. What she discovered made her uncomfortable. When the Council first arrived, there had been 47 ships from 19 different species. Each day brought new vessels as word spread through the galaxy about the new contact. At the peak, over 100 ships had been monitoring the Sol system. Now there were 31. Yunsu brought her concerns to the daily briefing. The ships are leaving, she told the room full of diplomats and scientists. Not in any organized way, but they are definitely leaving. Perhaps they have completed their observations, suggested one of the diplomats, or maybe they are going back to report to their governments, added another. But Yunsu was not convinced. She had studied military movements her whole career, and this did not look like a planned withdrawal. It looked like retreat. Bae Hyunwoo, a physicist working on the technology exchange program, had noticed something else. The council representatives were asking strange questions. Not about human science or culture, but about human history. How long had humans lived on Earth? Were there any gaps in their historical records? Had humans ever had contact with other worlds before now? Why do they keep asking about our past? Hyunwoo asked his colleague during a break between meetings. Should we not be talking about our future together? The colleague shrugged. Maybe they want to understand us better. Every species probably has different histories. But Hyunwoo remembered the look in the council representative's eyes when he had answered the questions. Not curiosity, fear. Back in the archives, Jiwoo and Sang-hoon worked through the night. They had called in 2 more archivists and a xenoanthropologist. Together, they were painting a picture that none of them wanted to believe. The fragments told a story. Every 50,000 years or so, something emerged from Sol 3. Not an invasion or a conquest, but something subtler and more terrible. The descriptions were vague and contradictory, but certain themes appeared over and over. They helped us. Read one fragment from 43,000 years ago. They solved our problems. They made us better. We did not realize until too late that we were no longer ourselves. Another from 37,000 years ago. The humans came with medicines and knowledge. Our children grew taller and smarter. Our crops yielded more food. Our wars ended. Within 3 generations, the Velthuran people existed only in memory. Humans, Jiwoo said, pointing to the translation. They call them humans. But humans have only existed on Earth for a few thousand years, protested the xenoanthropologist. These records are much older. Are we sure about that? Asked Sang-hoon quietly. They kept reading. The pattern was always the same. Contact, assistance, improvement, transformation, extinction. The oldest readable fragment was nearly 60,000 years old. It was from a species called the Akmoran, and it was apparently a final transmission from their homeworld. We were wrong to welcome them. We thought they came to learn from us, but we learned from them instead. We learned too much. We became too much like them. Now our children speak their words and think their thoughts and love with their love. The Akmoran people are gone. Only humans remain, wearing our faces and speaking our names. Warn others. The dark home must never wake again. The transmission ended with stellar coordinates, the same coordinates where Earth now orbited its yellow sun. This cannot be real, whispered the xenoanthropologist. Humans are not some ancient cosmic threat. They are just people. We have been talking to them for months. But Sang-hoon was staring at another screen, where he had been cross-referencing the timeline with galactic historical records. The cycles, he said slowly. Every time the warnings about Sol 3 stop, we also lose records of major civilizations. The Velthurans, the Akmoran Empire, the Golden Republic of Sektar, all gone, all forgotten, all disappeared at exactly the times when Sol 3 went quiet. Jiwoo felt cold despite the warm air in the archive chamber. How many? Dozens, Sang-hoon replied. Maybe hundreds. Some of the greatest civilizations in galactic history, all vanished without a trace during the quiet periods. They stared at the data for a long time. Outside the archive station, the galaxy continued its peaceful rotation. Ships traded between worlds, families raised children, scientists made discoveries, artists created beauty, and on a small blue world orbiting a yellow star, humans prepared to join the galactic community, unaware that their planet bore another name in the oldest tongues of the galaxy. What do we do? Jiwoo asked finally. Sang-hoon's old eyes were full of fear and sadness. We report this to the inner circle. They must know what we have found, and then we pray to whatever gods we believe in that we are wrong about everything. The silver ship moved through space like a gentle giant. It was bigger than any building on Earth, but it flew with the grace of a bird. Inside the ship, Commander Veltar looked at the blue and green planet growing larger in the viewing screen. This was their job, find new worlds and make friends with the people who lived there. Sol 3 looks peaceful, said his second officer. The scans show they have cities, but no weapons pointed at space. They seem safe, Veltar nodded. In his long career, he had met 127 different species. Most were friendly once you explained that the Galactic Council only wanted to help and trade. This little blue world looked no different from dozens of others he had visited. On Earth, in the Seoul Space Center, Kang Dai-ho sat at his desk watching radio waves on his computer screen. He drank cold coffee and listened to the usual sounds from space. static, distant stars and the hum of satellites. But then something new appeared on his screen, a pattern that did not belong. "Minho," he called to his friend at the next desk. "Look at this." Park Minho rolled his chair over and stared at the screen. The pattern was clear and strong. It repeated every few seconds like someone trying to get attention by knocking on a door. "This is not from Earth," Minho said quietly. "This is from something else." They looked at each other for a long moment. Then Minho stood up and ran to find Lee So-young, the director of the facility. Lee So-young was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. She had worked at the Space Center for 20 years, always hoping for this day but never really believing it would come. When Minho burst into her office, talking fast about signals from space, she felt her heart start beating faster. "Show me," she said. They ran back to Daeho's desk. The signal was still there, strong and clear. So-young looked at it for a long time. She thought about all the movies and books about aliens. She thought about fear and war and invasion. But the signal felt different. It felt polite. "Send a response," she told Daeho. "Something simple, math. Everyone understands math." Daeho's hands shook as he typed commands into his computer. He sent a sequence of prime numbers into space. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. If something intelligent was out there, it would understand. The response came back in less than a minute. The same sequence, but continued. 13, 17, 19, 23. Then something new. Pictures made of numbers. A star, a planet. A simple drawing of a creature with 2 arms and 2 legs. "They know we are here," So-young whispered. Within hours, teams of people rushed to the Seoul Space Center. Kim Tae-jun, who studied languages, came with bags full of books and computers. Choi Hae-jin, who knew about different cultures, brought her students and cameras. Government officials arrived in black cars, followed by reporters and scientists from around the world. The aliens, for everyone now knew that is what they were, seemed happy to wait. Their signals came regularly, always patient, always polite. They sent pictures of their ship, their star maps, and simple drawings of themselves. They looked mostly like humans, but taller and thinner, with large eyes and gray skin. Kim Tae-jun worked day and night to build a translation system. The aliens helped by sending simple words with pictures: water, sun, life, friend, peace. Soon, they could have basic conversations. The first real message from the aliens was, "Greetings. People of Sol 3, we are the Galactic Council. We come in peace to meet you and welcome you to the community of worlds." So-young read the message aloud to the cameras. Around the world, billions of people watched and listened. Some were afraid. Some were excited. Most were simply amazed that they were not alone in the universe. "We accept your greeting," So-young replied. "We are humans. We live on the planet we call Earth. We are happy to meet you." Over the following days, the conversation grew richer. The aliens explained that they were explorers and diplomats from a group called the Galactic Council. This council had 847 different species, all working together for peace and progress. They traveled the galaxy looking for new civilizations to invite into their community. Commander Veltar himself spoke to the humans through their translation system. His voice sounded kind and slightly tired, like a grandfather talking to children. "Your species shows great promise," he told them. "You have discovered radio and spaceflight quickly. You seem to work well together. These are good signs." "What happens now?" asked Tae-jun during one of their conversations. "Now we learn about each other," Veltar replied. "We will share knowledge and stories. If your people agree, Earth can join the Council as a junior member. You will have access to our technology, our trade routes, and our protection. In return, you will add your own unique voice to our community." The humans were excited. They had imagined alien contact as either invasion or isolation. They had never imagined an invitation to join something bigger than themselves. Choi Hae-jin asked about other species in the council. Veltar was happy to describe them. There were the Andromedans, who were great traders and loved beautiful things. The Centaurians, who were excellent builders and engineers. The Outer Rim Confederacy, made up of dozens of smaller species who had banded together for protection and friendship. Each species brings something special to the council, Veltar explained. The Andromedans teach us about art and beauty. The Centaurians show us how to build things that last. The Confederation species remind us that even small voices matter. "What can humans bring?" asked So-young. There was a pause. Then Veltar said, We will discover that together. Every species has gifts they do not know about until they share them with others. As weeks passed, more council ships arrived in Earth's solar system. They stayed far away, respecting Earth's space, but they were there, dozens of them, representing many different species. Each wanted to meet the newest members of the galactic community. The humans began to feel special. Here they were, barely able to reach their own moon, and already they were being welcomed by ancient civilizations that had traveled between stars for thousands of years. Dai-Ho, who had first detected the alien signal, often stayed late at the Space Center. He liked watching the signals flow back and forth between Earth and the alien ships. The conversations were getting longer and more detailed every day. Plans were being made for human representatives to visit the Council's main station. We are going to be part of something amazing, he told Minho one evening as they watched stars appear. In the darkening sky, neither of them noticed that some of those stars were actually alien ships, or that the number of ships seemed to grow smaller each night. They did not know that deep in space, emergency meetings were being called. They could not hear the worried voices of council archivists as they searched through ancient records, looking for information about Sol 3 that was older than human civilization itself. All the humans knew was that they had been invited to join the galaxy, and they were eager to accept.